Hello everyone, and we're continuing this speed run series, and we've kind of moved up to the next rating boundary now, which is 1200 to 1400. And as always, the aim of this video is for me to try and look at the typical mistakes that my opponent might be playing, and maybe you guys at home can learn from what we're really working out the moves you shouldn't be doing and what mistakes have been made. Now, I'm going to start off with a Dutch opening. Now, again, I don't feel openings as important as people make out, but you need to pick an opening and stick to it. It doesn't really matter what you're going to go for. And I've always thought a very good beginner's opening is actually the stone wall, where you put all your pawns like this, because it's a very solid setup, and that's kind of what we want to get in the game. So I'm going to bring my knight out. Again, I'm not breaking any rules. I'm just developing sensibly. I want to control the center. I want to get castle before I do anything drastic. And again, we see a little move here which you wouldn't see at higher level. Unnecessary pawn move. I mean, this setup that my opponent's played is actually quite passive. It's like a collie, but you have to place your pieces where, you know, in relation to your pawns. And the problem with this, you've always got to think, what of my pieces have become bad? And it's this bishop. And maybe white can go b4 and bishop b2, but I would certainly be trying to get my bishop to this diagonal, then try to move this pawn later on. Now, the stone wall consists of us putting all our pawns on light squares and having that really important blockade in the center there. Now, I don't need to play c6 yet. I'm going to develop my bishop, and this is a very nice diagonal. I'm going to castle, and the downside of this, I've placed my pawns on light squares, so my dark squares are weak. Whenever you play any opening, you must know which of your squares are weakened, and this square here is certainly a weakened square. But I'm going to just develop to try and give a little bit of extra protection to that square. And now, again, when you play any opening, you should know the middle game ideas, and I'd say we're even getting to the middle game here. And one idea that I love playing in this position, because my bishop is so well placed and I'm formulating plans around the placement of my pieces, is this idea of swinging the rook around and trying to target my opponent's pawn there. And I've had many games like this, and yet again, my opponent now plays this good move. This is a good move, blocking the bishop, but we continue with our plan of trying to hit the pawn on h2. My opponent blocks that one, so my opponent, in all fairness, is defending well here. And I'm just thinking what to do. I want to get my remaining pieces out, and I'm just going to play b6 because he stopped any immediate attack for now. And the idea of this is I want to get my bishop on this square here, which looks like it's blocked, but in the future when my opponent plays c4, we might well see an opening of this diagonal. So again, I'm just thinking about how to get my pieces to better squares. I'd like to get my queen somewhere and maybe my rook over to the king side as well, because the placement of my rook here certainly indicates that that's where I want to attack. But this formation, I really think against 1d4, it's a very underrated opening. It stops all of white's attacking ideas, basically, the stone wall, when you get into the structure. And the only issue is that you weaken this big square in the middle, but it's the only opening you can play against 1d4 as black that you gain a space advantage from. I remember reading a chapter in this great book, Positional Play, by Kramnik, who was talking about the Stonewall Dutch, and that's where I learnt a lot about it. Very highly recommended. Positional Play by Naroditsky. The name I can never pronounce, unfortunately passed away now. Okay, but my opponent's playing well as well. He hasn't made any obvious mistakes. This g3 shows a good level of understanding. We wouldn't have seen g3, I don't think, at the lower level. My opponent was looking at my plan. He was looking at where I was pointing. He was seeing that I wanted to bring the queen over here, and he's stopping that plan. And you can already see the difference in the levels is that this kind of move, you know, we're seeing more of that now as the levels increase and our opponents get stronger. Now, I don't know which way I should capture. I'm going to go for This way opens the f file. I really, but this way opens the bishop a little bit more. Okay, let's go for the bishop opening. And now we've got to think about how we're going to improve our pieces. Now I'd like to kick this knight away with a move like Queen f6, but that would drop my knight. I'm looking at my opponent's most annoying piece, and it's certainly this knight. And I'm thinking, okay, I really want to do something with that. The one downside for me of putting the rook over here is that if things open up in the middle, this rook is completely misplaced. And I've lost many games from this kind of thing. For example, let's say I capture here, I open the d file, and my rook is all in on that area of the board. It can't get back to the middle. It can't get back to this open file. So I want to avoid opening files which I can't control. So don't open up lines which you can't control. But as I've now committed my rook over here, I should be looking at this side of the board, and you should always be looking where you have more space, how you can increase the pressure there. Now that I have a pawn on e4, that gives me a little bit more space on the king side, and I'm thinking of ways I can increase the pressure on that area of the board. And one idea that strikes me as being interesting is I'd like to at some point get my queen to attack h2, but that's a long way off. But maybe I can go g5, g4, clamp down on any break like f4 or h4 because I capture on pass on, and then try to bring my queen in behind that to take on h2. Now I don't know if my opponent has disconnected or something here, which would be a little bit disappointing, but even if he has, I think we'll keep this video in because I want to show you this stone wall and throw some new opening ideas at you now. If you watch the previous videos, hopefully by watching these videos you'll look at the openings and you'll think, I like that opening, and then you'll decide to learn it yourself. Or I don't like that opening, there's something I don't like about it. It's personal choice after all. And that's something very important. You've got to pick openings you like the look of and you think you'll enjoy playing. Doesn't matter what other people do, not really. It matters what you want to do and what you're most comfortable doing. And a bit upsetting there that my opponent, I don't know, decided to withdraw. Oh, we don't want to rematch him, that's for sure. Well, you occasionally get that. And against e4, I'm now going to try the black line again. I know this is very popular, and at this rating range I think it's a very interesting opening. Now stage 1, if you've seen the previous videos, get the knights in the middle and play e5. So I'm developing my knights, create a little bit of pressure against the pawn here. Now I could go e5 straight away, but I'm going to move the knight here immediately. And now we go e5. This is stage 1 of the black line. When you're learning any opening, know what you're doing. Now this move is a move which I know a lot of people ask me about, and again it's something that happens at lower level. At lower level, players want to release the tension in the middle. Now whenever the pawn structure changes, you should really ask yourself, how does that help me and how does that help my opponent? And I'm thinking now there's not as much pressure on this square. My opponent has got a queenside space because of this pawn, so he should probably base his play on that area of the board. I should probably be looking at f5 or c6. You've got to think about your pawn breaks. And I'm going to now transpose into a King's Indian defense. I could also go bishop e7, but I'm figuring I prefer my bishop on this diagonal because it has more potential on this diagonal than this diagonal. Now my opponent's pinned my knight, but whenever opponent moves a piece in your half of the board, the first thing you should think about is giving that piece a kick. And already he's gone back, and that opens up ideas of the knight coming in here. And I'm going to castle, because if he's not thinking and he plays this move, which I was expecting, he's not looking at my ideas and he's not aware of this very common idea, knight g4. I'm going to capture that bishop because it can now not retreat. And winning that bishop is actually a big gain for me in this structure. It might not seem like it. Why is it a gain? Because when the position's closed, knights are better. But the potential of my bishop is great. At some point, f4, I might open the bishop up. At some point, f5, and there might be some exchanges. The bishop opens up. His bishop is a great attacker. It's his best bishop. Why is that bishop his best bishop? Because his pawns are on light squares, so his light square bishop is quite bad, but his dark square bishop is is a good piece. So now I want to think about getting some play on the other area of the board. And well, maybe I'm going to take this bishop off first, and I'm going to now move my knight to c5, and I've stopped him taking it. Strange choice him taking with a pawn. I think that's also a bad positional choice, getting these two pawns here. And of course I've got to watch out for h5. Do I want to play g5 there? Every time there's a possibility to change the pawn structure, does it help you or not? And I don't think it does, because at some point I might want f5 and want my pawn guarding that. So I don't really want to, I have to play g5 against h5. And I don't want to allow that. So I'm going to, for the time being, develop my last piece. If he goes h5, I will capture with my bishop. I might even play h5 myself, just so we get a grip over there. That does give him the g5 square. Remember, every pawn move weakens a square, but that doesn't really seem to help him. Okay, maybe he's going to go knight h2. Quite an interesting idea. But we should now try to start play somewhere. His king's on the queen side. I need to open up lines here. You know, even if there's no immediate way you can open it up, go for it. Now, I was hoping I can take this one. It's risky generally to open up lines in front of your king, but I don't see a problem with it here because he needs a dark square bishop, and already we can see that without that dark square bishop, how can he break through? He needs to be able to threaten moves such as bishop takes h6, but he can't. So as long as I keep the king side on, how I'm just thinking of my own ideas. But I'm thinking, how can he open me up? Well, he can try this idea, but then I'm always going to go h5. As long as I keep my king well protected, I'm going to be feeling confident here. Now, let's get the rook. And again, my play may seem very slow, but that doesn't matter. We've got to have a plan. And the plan now, of course, is to pawn storm where his king is. And this is a technique you use often when kings are on opposite sides of the board, because you don't want to throw pawns in front of your own king. If my king was over here, it'd be much riskier. But now I can freely throw my pawns up the board to try and open his king up. And I'm going to now take this because he can't bring his knight into the center. And in this position, I'm going to, well, I'm thinking about, I'm going to sacrifice a pawn, because we can sacrifice pawns. We're already a pawn up, but we can clearly sacrifice pawns when, and let's think the best way of doing this, we open up our opponent's king. My pawn storm has worked. Now if I go rook here, he goes knight here, and I want to get my queen over here. I wouldn't be able to do that. So I'm going to bring my queen over first to the open file, and I'm doing a slightly better move order, because if he goes here, I can bring my rook here now, threatening checkmate. And my straightforward idea is rook a8, maybe bring the other rook over, and we have everything lined up against my opponent's king. And what I did there was a very standard way of opening my opponent's king position. We might even see me flick in e4 here. Remember, I mentioned this bishop. That bishop has great long-term potential, and I just might open that bishop up. Now I want to keep my queen as dangerous. Oh, I'm very tempted to take here as well now, but this requires a bit of calculation. Pawn takes, queen take, check, queen b2, queen takes queen, king takes, d4, check, winning that bishop. Well, you know what, that's probably a good idea, but I don't want to exchange queens because his king is so weak, and this move seems a lot stronger. He can't go there. I take his knight. I'm keeping the threat of knight b3 because it didn't win immediately. The threat is stronger than the execution. My idea of e4, opening the bishop, becomes a lot stronger. My rook a8 idea, there's a lot of problems he's got here, isn't there? A lot of problems. And probably e4 is my most dangerous threat, but the rook coming here, my position has worked perfectly. And it was actually all about my opponent losing that dark square bishop. And he also played some funny moves. Okay, he's found a good move here. He stopped me playing e4, but I'll just bring this one over. But he played too many moves on the queen side here, like knight a2. Strange move. I don't really think that was a great move. We're going to get my other rook over now. Too many pieces attacking here. I could also maybe have gone knight to this square there, but I'm now getting ready for an explosion on b3. And my opponent should have just tried to throw everything like at my king. And now, well, we have a couple of ways to win, and I think getting rid of the last defense around my opponent's king makes the most sense. Knight d2 will actually be checkmate here, funnily enough. And if he takes it, well, everything perfectly placed. It's a pity I didn't get my last piece, the bishop, into the game, but we don't need to do that. And here, well, there it is, the end of the game there. So what did my opponent do wrong there? Well, if we look at the opening, d5 is a typical idea, and it's not a terrible move, but you won't see title players, I feel, play this move because it loses a lot of freedom in the position. One thing that stronger players always do is keep the tension. You can always play d5, so why release it? Give yourself as many options as you can if you want to improve. And then we had this big mistake. I don't like this move because after h6 he seems to have lost the tempo, and now I set him up with this one where he can't retreat and he falls straight into it. And in these structures, when you get rid of that dark square bishop, your king becomes super safe. The next part of it was being very wary of his ideas over here. I held up those ideas, and then slowly we developed our counterplay on the queen side, and that developed into a winning attack there. Okay, let's see if we can keep going. We haven't had any cheats so far. In my last speedrun video, I think the person I lost to got banned. Let's leave it at that. Now, what are we going to play with white? Well, I'm going to play the Chessbrah London because I know a lot of you are very keen on that. There's a link to my Chessbrah courses in the description where I've done a very intense course on the Chessbrah London, which you can buy it directly. 10 hours of video. I've also done a GingerGM course, which is a bit cheaper, on the Chessbrah London. Or if you don't want to spend any money, then I have some YouTube videos on it as well. Now the Chessbrah London starts like this. This is stage 1. And again, I'm breaking down these openings in the easiest possible stages. Now my opponent here is being a little bit crafty. Why is he playing that move? Let's not play without thinking. Now the normal move here is to play e3. But all of a sudden, he would be able to go g5. If my bishop comes here, f6. If my bishop goes back here, h4, winning my bishop. So we've got to, when our opponent does something peculiar, we've got to think, hang on a minute, is he up to something? And as long as I just don't do that, I'm going to control g5 a little bit more now to take the sting out of that. This move h5, I'm a big fan of Harry, makes no sense at all to me. Because if he ever castles, it's going to be weak. He weakens the g5 square. He's played 4 pawn moves without developing a piece. I've developed 3 pieces. So I feel his strategy is completely wrong. And because he hasn't developed a piece, I'm not going to play e3 here. I want to open it up because I want to punish him for playing these very slow moves. He's trying to keep everything as closed as possible. That makes sense. He doesn't want to open his position. I'm going to complete my development. Again, we can't be impatient in chess. Another strange move, opening up g6. Now I'm going to immediately take on d5, try to take advantage of this one. We'll give him a check, take away those castling rights for him. g6, if he hadn't gone h5, this wouldn't be a problem. He's moved his king. He had to move his king. I'm going to line up my queen against it. I'm playing just logical moves. I want to get my rooks now into the middle of the board. Castle's queenside, get the rook there. I want to look at how my pieces can combine to attack that one. My knight coming around here looks very tempting. But for the time being, I'm not going to do anything unless I see an immediate win. I'm going to get every single piece perfectly placed. Rook to e1. And again, this way I'm playing in these speedrun videos requires actually not much calculation. I'm just playing 1 or 2 move tactics, but I'm following basic principles. My opponent plays a funny looking move. Okay, why is he doing that? Must be wrong. It is wrong. I'm bringing all of my pieces to the right squares. I'm looking at what my opponent does. If he goes here, my knight can come over here. I'm not worried. My knight has a way in. Knights on the rim are kind of dim, but it's coming back in the middle. Now here, now that I've developed, now it's time to start attacking his position. Now, how are we going to find a way through? Well, something like increasing... We've got to look at weaknesses in my opponent's position. I'm looking at these 2 squares. Now, bishop here makes a lot of sense, threatening in some positions to take here, but also coming around the angle here. I'm also thinking about getting this knight in. Now if I go here, he might run away with his king. If I go bishop here, then I feel that if he tries running away, well, he might be able to go there then. And does that help him? So I'm going to bring my knight to this square. Two ideas. My knight, he's found the best move. He's trying to come back. Now, can I might have to open it up with a sacrifice soon. Just thinking how we get our pieces in, because he has all benefits. I mean, all well played to him to keep things as closed as he can. Now, I'd love to get my knight into that square. How else do we improve our position here? Well, maybe the queen can defend that one and have ideas of coming over here. If the knight comes here, he takes, check, takes. My rook comes in, doesn't quite work. What moves is he going to play next? I'm going to see what he does, because I can't find any obvious move for him. But I'm looking at a lot of his moves, and I think they help me. Knight here, my bishop suddenly comes in. His bishop moves, I take on e6. I'm going to go here. I'm going to start moving quicker now, guys. But I'm actually thinking a lot of moves he plays weakens his position. Now, is this such a move? Okay. Well, I'm going to take here, and I'm going to, like I mentioned, use this square, because I want to increase the pressure on these weak points. He's defended well. I want to get my knight into the g6 square. So my immediate threat, take on... So actually, again, sometimes if you can't find a move, you can get frustrated, but then you have to switch your thought process to what is my opponent going to play next. And I realized there that I was thinking I was getting a bit frustrated. My position should be great. How do I break through? But I suddenly realized, well, hang on a minute. Actually, I didn't think there. I should have... that was a crazy move, because a rook there, which he missed. He could have come rook there with a very annoying pin. And this way, well, I should be alright. But I basically... the way I played it, I realized that he had not many moves, and a lot of moves that he played made his position worse. And I played a decent move, just defending the pawn, giving me better options, but nothing really that scary. And I allowed my opponent to hang himself, and he's doing a very good job of that now. He did defend well from a position of extreme weakness there, but he actually, I have to admit, he did miss one chance of going rook e8. So I was a little bit slack at one stage there. As soon as I said I got to speed up, that's my excuse anyway. But his position's completely lost now. He's got to watch out for this one. You can see how my queen is slightly better placed than it was on e2. I'm going to slip in there. He's losing everything in the position. We'll just keep it very simple now. We'll take that one. If he takes the knight, queen takes d5 would be the move I'd suggest, because I want to get the queens off, because I'm so much... but I'm going to play knight takes just because his king is weaker than mine. But if you wanted to keep it really simple, then the queen capturing is okay. I want to use all my pieces, but of course his king is now going to be open to ideas. I want to get my queen back around. So check, his king comes here. How do I get my queen back around? I want to get to c2. So maybe here, queen c2 would be a very good option. So I'm going to play this move first. And the reason is I'm now threatening this b4, king here, queen c2. If I go b4 straight away, do we have a beautiful win here? I want to create a piece of art, don't we always? I don't have to. Now, takes here, b4. Okay, I think we can play this one, guys. And the point is, takes b4, rook takes a6. We want to, you know, and I think we're going to get this on the board. Check here, and rook a6. Next move is extremely pretty, and final checkmate there. Okay, nice. So maybe I had a much better way to play that, but I think that was actually a good demonstration. At the key point there, I played very normal moves. We misplaced his king. I got all my pieces of good squares. Maybe I had a way to break through better here, but I couldn't see it. So I looked at his weaknesses, these two squares. I tried to think of ways to get into those two squares, but my opponent played well. And it was around about here where I think queen e3 was a clever move, because suddenly it's like, what do I do next? If I try to force the issue, I could actually lose this position. You can't always sacrifice, but I suddenly start now thinking, what's my opponent's next move? This is so important for you guys to improve. Start thinking what it's going to be. And I looked, if he puts anything on e7, he blocks the f7 square. So my bishop comes in here. So he can't develop naturally here. If he moves anything to h6, well, I might even then continue grabbing there, but he's moving pieces away. If he moves this bishop here, he loses this one. If he plays b4, suddenly my knight is able to come in to these weakened squares. So after I played this move, which does improve my position a little bit, it defends here, maybe my queen can come over here. He now should have been patient, but what move does he play? He plays this move bishop d6, and even though I must admit this may not have actually even been the best move, it was the right idea. For example, here maybe I should have done something like bishop takes h5, but I've made him weaken his position. But I'm just checking, I think he could have gone rook e8 here, and this would have been a totally different game, because suddenly I realised, hang on a minute, I flaffed this up and I've put myself in a pin. So clearly, you know, it's still possible to blunder at any level. Lucky my opponent didn't see that. Okay, we'll make this the last one. We're going to go for the Chessbrah London again. So stage 1, this stage, let's do this. We don't need to think too much. There you go, just like before. Now, my opponent played h5 in that last game, which raised alarm bells, but I realised his idea. Now, this move allows me the idea of going knight here. He will go bishop d6 then. But I'm very happy to see this move because it means his c-pawn can't move. And that means he can't get control of the centre. And I think positionally I'm better. Why? Let's compare. This would be a symmetrical position. But look at this bishop. It's outside of my pawns compared to his bishop on c8. So I feel that with the way he's developed here is giving him an inferior position. Am I worried about g5? If I am, I'm going to play this. But I don't think I am, because his kingside again. You can allow your opponent to play moves that you feel might be dubious. And this move does seem to weaken his kingside. And now I've got very good development. I'm going to just simply castle kingside here. I could have gone for queenside, but I see with the pawn on a6, he's ready to do this kind of stuff. So I didn't really want to do that. Now, I don't want to lose this bishop to knight h5, so I'm going to play h3. My bishop has h2. And I'm playing this very patiently, and I'm relying on the fact that he's really playing a piece down. It's not as serious as that. I'm exaggerating. But this bishop here is a very bad piece for him at the moment. Now, I'm going to just move my queen here so I can get a rook in the middle of the board. Why is that good? I love lining my rooks up against my opponent's queen. You can now see the use of this move. I don't have to lose that bishop, which I'm actually very fond of because it's on a nice diagonal. If I hadn't played h3, again, I'm foreseeing my opponent's ideas. I love playing moves like this because at some point, the d-file may very well open up after e4 or something like that. So I'm going to continue. And when it does, his queen is in a bad version. So I'm just improving as much as I can before I change the nature of the position. Okay, this is actually a good move. He's getting rid of my bishop. Now I'm gonna start to move into the center. I have to admit, actually, it's a bit annoying. Maybe I should have kept this bishop, or maybe I should have played a3 first. That would have been better. But this is still absolutely okay because remember, his bishop is bad. It's stuck behind his pawn. So even though he's got the bishop pair, look at that piece. How does it ever get out? How does it ever get out? So I remember there's a famous Magnus Carlsen game where he just played against this bishop in a similar London system. So I'm now going to increase my hold on this square. I took with a pawn. Double pawn's not always bad because I wanted to control the weakness on e4. Double pawns in the center can actually be very good. And when they've got a pawn next to them, giving them that extra support, they can really work very well. So what's my plan here? Okay, well, first of all, I'm going to capture this one. And the point of this move is that I have the double pawns and I can put another pawn here. And I've got to watch out for the e4 square. This is the one positional thing, a bit like that Stonewall Dutch. So if my opponent's very clever, he could try taking this knight, because this knight is key because it controls e4. But he didn't do that, which I'm happy to see. So his bishop is still very bad. So I'm going to now continue because I'm controlling the center. When you're controlling the center, you can definitely aim to expand and push pawns on the king side, which I have done there. Okay, his knight's gone away. And I'm just going to bring this bishop to a slightly better square, stopping his queen coming in. In some lines, my bishop might pop out here. And we've got to think now how we're going to develop this position. I mean, I could go for the... Okay, well, he's made this big decision now. And I'm going to open up the F-file first. And how are we going to increase this? So it feels like there should be this area of the board where I'm aiming for. If I go E4... I'm just thinking long term, he will capture it and his bishop might get to this diagonal. I don't want him to do that, so we don't want to do that. Now here, he might want to come in to this square. So if I go H4, he might come in there. So I'm first going to go Queen G2 to defend that square. So now when I play here, Knight E4, if I capture that one, I win a pawn. Now a very clever move for my opponent would be Bishop D7 here. Because then H4, knight here, and after an exchange he gets his bishop to this diagonal, probably worth a pawn. Now this is also maybe clever. He wants to get rid of the knight, gain the square. So if I go H4, he might counter me with B4. So again, I'm going to stop his plan. The problem for my opponent is that, okay, he's continuing this idea, and if I can lock the pawn structure, that bishop will never get out. My bishop has a little bit more potential. So B4 is tempting, but then his rook comes in. Am I worried about that? I don't feel I am, but if I take here Bishop A6, I don't really like. So I'm going to go B4 to stop his bishop coming in. But he might now, I have to deal with his rook coming in. And the way I'm going to deal with this is to... The reason I played this, I'm playing against the bishop. I didn't want that pawn there to move any further forwards because then the bishop frees itself. So I'm looking at my opponent's pieces all the time. And I'm relying on this, and I want to start pushing him back. This move, then push his rook back. Because like I mentioned, positionally, my bishop has better potential than his. So I'm going to go here. Now if I was him, I would definitely move in. Sack a pawn, hope to get the bishop on this diagonal. It might not be a sound sacrifice, but practically it is. Very good move from my opponent. I have to now accept this pawn, and I'm going to accept the pawn. But if he's ever, imagine him getting his bishop to this diagonal, which I need to stop, I'm going to be a lot worse. Well, I don't know about worse, but my king is a little bit weak. So practically speaking, rather than putting his knight out of the game forever, when his knight and bishop are both out of the game, this way it gives himself practical chances. Now I say that seems a little bit premature to me, his last move, because I'm not sure how this is going to help him. He's weakening his king even with this idea, and I think we're just going to take this one. His rook now might find is a major problem, because it's like that first stone wall game when the rook was on the wrong side of the board. If you're going to open lines, make sure your rooks can connect with those lines very quickly. He's opened the F-file, but his rook is not ready to connect. So his king is now extremely exposed. And I can start thinking about Bishop D6, which I'm going to do. I'm looking at the F8 square. I want to get my rook to F8. He opened that file far too prematurely. If you're going to open files, make sure you're then going to control them. Otherwise, do not be impatient in the opening of those files. And this Bishop D6 move, well, I don't see how he's going to stop me bringing my rook into this square where he's going to have to lose the queen. If he takes on H4, Rook F8 is checkmate. And again, my opponent has kind of hung himself after playing some very nice moves. Knight E4 I like, but he followed up that sacrifice in a far too impatient way. He could have played it much more, building up much more patiently, and just saying, okay, White's got a weakened king. How do I get my bishop to this diagonal? That's what I would have tried to do. I'd have even thought about going bishop here, queen B6, bishop B7, just any way to get the bishop on this diagonal. Now my opponent has rather desperately taken here. It's not going to help him here. It's a rook after all, but he had a helpless position, and well, this is the same as resigning, isn't it, really? If all my pieces just floating harmoniously into his structure, and it's going to be checkmate now. I might as well do it with checks, and 3 pieces the magic number when attacking, and my 3 pieces just coordinate perfectly. Okay, so an interesting game there. I mean, again, quite a patient build-up from me. In actual fact, I did at some point, I think around here, Queen E2, bad move. You know, you got to, even when you win a game, you got to be very judgmental about the way you played. I like this bishop. This bishop is a very good attacker, and even though I'm still better after he takes it, I've gone h3 to preserve this bishop. Why on earth didn't I just play the very patient a3? Because then his knight looks, it's not just about losing my bishop, his knight looks stupid because it blocks his pawn, it's in the way of his bishop, and if I'd have played the very patient a3 and then queen e2, rook opposite the queen, and then I can start thinking about pushing with e4, moving my knight in. This would have been a much better way to play. But in principle, the problem he had all along, which he was never able to solve, and you can see this as soon as even move 4, which is quite remarkable, the whole game in some way revolved around him trapping that bishop in. This is move 4. Let's go to move 24. Well, here, what's his problem? It's this bishop. He can't get that bishop past his own pawns. So you can often base your game very carefully around one problem that your opponent has. As long as you keep an eye on everything else. That was my idea here, and some of the key moments there, and I don't even know if they're the best moves, but it was an idea. Had I let him go b4 and bishop a6, his bishop comes out. By playing this move, we keep that bishop in. So I'm basing my whole positional plan around one of his bad pieces, and that won me this game. Do make sure you like and subscribe, please do. It helps me. I know I'm doing a range of different videos. I'm going to try to keep these ones going because it seems like they're quite popular. Do check out GChess as well, this latest website I'm developing. Very good for improving your openings. So give it a little look. It's free to have a look. Bye for now.